Theater of the Mind. A few weeks ago, the St. Louis area was hit by the biggest snowstorm we'd seen in several years. It started early Friday afternoon, and like an idiot, I didn't bail out of work early because I really wanted to make my attendance bonus for January. The interstate was completely choked with non-moving traffic, and I decided to just get something to eat. Fortunately, I was currently stranded in the parking lot of a massive shopping complex, so there were plenty of choices, and waited out, and hopefully the traffic would die down and the roads would get cleared. As the evening wore on and the situation only worsened, I knew I was going to have to find a way to keep myself amused and out of the cold. As luck would have it, there was a movie theater in the complex, and so I figured I would catch a flick. The only film playing that looked like it might not totally suck was Escape Room, which I had not planned on catching theatrically, but to my surprise turned out to be a really well-made, exciting thriller. If you haven't seen it, the plot is simple. 6 strangers have each received invitations to an escape room game that ends up being full of death traps, and the real challenge is simply staying alive. One of my favorite sequences was the 8-ball room, a large rec room with a pool table and jukebox that's built completely upside down. As if that wasn't disorienting enough, the jukebox fires up and Petula Clark's 1964 hit Downtown starts blasting, making it difficult for the players to concentrate. If they'd only known that several clues were actually in the lyrics of the song, they probably wouldn't have been so fired up about finding the source of the music and shutting it off. This was just one example of the sadism of the mysterious creators of the game. Every room did indeed have a solution, but the players were constantly bombarded with dirty tricks and distractions to thwart their attempts to find it, and their confusion would only add to the rising panic that would make it even more difficult to process the clues and puzzles. And you gotta admit, finding your way out of an upside-down rec room with a schmaltzy pop song blasting in your ears while the floor/ceiling is falling away piece by piece into the abyss could be pretty damn confusing. While escape rooms and haunted attractions are actually much better when they don't systematically kill off their guests, the use of distortion, confusion, and disorientation can really add to the experience. Making things coherent, logical, and real feeling are all good things to work for in a haunt, but other times it's good to make things a little crazy and bewildering to throw the audience off balance and keep them guessing. In American cinema and TV, we've developed a tendency to over-explain everything and tie up all the loose ends, putting the audience in the position of omniscience. In other parts of the world, they're a little more loose with that. That's why I've always liked Australian horror films. Their attitude is, the people directly involved in the story don't know what the hell is going on, so why should you? The same thing works in a haunt. Mess with their heads a little and they'll be less able to predict what's coming up. Early in Season 1, I did a segment on trying to create the sense of the uncanny, that creepy, queasy feeling you get when things are just a little off and unnatural. It's great when you can achieve it, but it's a lot easier to do in literature or movies when you have more control over what the audience can see and perceive. It's a lot tougher to get in a haunt because subtlety often just doesn't work. There's not enough time for people to process fine details. A single detail that you want people to catch will generally have to be pretty bold. The smaller details would have to be repeated throughout to make an impression. For example, angles. Throwing off angles can have a disorienting effect on people, but simply skewing a single picture or setting a table off level would go unnoticed. Now, throw the angle off of everything in the room, the pictures, the window and door frames, the furniture, all in the same direction and by the same degree, and the effect can be dramatic to the point where it affects the guest's equilibrium. Just think about how people react when they first walk into a vortex tunnel. They can barely stay on their feet. Many can't move forward without shutting their eyes. When perception of the total surroundings is distorted, it can really mess with a person's sense of place and balance. More boldly distorted visuals can be used sparingly but to great effect. Picture a Victorian sitting room with portraits on the walls and various busts and statuary, and the busts and the people in the paintings are turned around facing away from the viewer. Or they don't have any faces. It's not scary per se, but it's wrong and freaky. Then follow that up with a high-tech video portrait with a shock scare and watch the fun. Use of misdirection and distraction can also be used to pull people's attention away from an area where a major prop or set piece can be swapped out for something different, so that when they turn back around, the scene has changed. They might not even know what it is that has changed, but many will get the sense that something did, and it can help increase the feelings of uncertainty and paranoia. Levitation can be a pretty creepy effect if you can do it. An object just hanging out unsupported in space really has an unsettling effect on people. Sometimes it can be hard to conceal wires and strings because that's the first thing that people look for when they see something apparently floating in the air. But if it's a large enough object and you can restrict the audience's viewing angle, you can use an armature extending to the wall behind it to support it. And if you're really ambitious and have the space to do it, there's always that upside down room. It's probably out of the range of the average home haunter, but if you can pull it off, it really makes an impression. Manipulation of the visual elements in a scene don't have to stop with distortions of normal details. You can go all the way into the abstract. Passage through scenes like dot rooms and vortex tunnels can act like logical palate cleansers, knocking people out of the mood and atmosphere of the previous scenes before they move on to the next scene setup. Movement of actors can also be made unnatural and freaky. Think of the nightmarish twitching torsos in Jacob's Ladder or the spastic, jerky body movements of the nurses in Silent Hill. Slowing down and speeding up movements abruptly can get people's attention and act as an effective momentary distraction for another actor to approach or for a prop change to be made. I saw footage once, I don't remember where it was from, but there were some scenes where actors would pass through where they were actually standing on conveyor belts so they looked like they were floating along without moving their legs. A very creepy effect. Probably not doable for the home haunter, but maybe something could be rigged with roller skates or Healy wheel shoes. You'd probably want to do this in an area where the guests can't see the actor's actual feet, but the concept merits consideration. Lighting and shadows can be played with to provide a disorienting environment, but should be exercised with caution. Areas of total darkness should be avoided anywhere there are obstacles present for obvious safety reasons. And in areas free of obstruction, darkness is probably better used where some kind of night vision can be used by haunt personnel just to keep an eye on the guests and make sure everybody's okay. Strobe lights are popular, but there should always be warnings posted for the benefit of people with seizure disorders like epilepsy. If someone in line states that they have such an issue, hopefully the haunt staff have a way of turning the strobes off when those people get to that area. One of the most creative areas of opportunity for distortion, distraction, and disorientation is sound design. Not only are there myriad great sources of music and sound effects available online, simple free audio softwares like Audacity and GarageBand allow for infinite sampling, mixing, looping, and manipulation. Music can be sped up, slowed down, flattened, or brightened. Pops and scratches can be added for that old-timey gramophone effect. The sky's the limit. For years at the Blackford Home Haunt where I play, that was my specialty. They generally supplied the cue line music, but I provided the sound effects and atmosphere music tracks for inside the haunt. Of course, there are tons of choices of ready-made music tailor-made for the haunt, but I've found one of the most disturbing things to do is simply making a shockingly wrong music choice that simply doesn't fit the environment. Case in point, the aforementioned 8-ball room and escape room. The players are racing against the clock, trying to not be killed. They've already lost one person in the group. They're in this insane upside-down world, and what song comes on but this ridiculously upbeat 60s pop song? Picture a grisly murder scene with blood and guts everywhere. One would expect some dramatic and intense theatrical background music, but imagine if a tinny radio was playing something like The Wonderful Thing About Tiggers or Rafi's Banana Phone. The mental disconnect would be jarring and deliciously creepy. Extra tracks can of course be added. A well-known song could be overlaid with sinister sound effects or additional voices in a way that can be heard but not well understood. Look up number stations on YouTube for some good samples to mix in with the music. This was used to good effect in the video game Half-Life 2, where there was a creepy radio with some weird music and a number station transmission playing. Running a voice track backwards can also be pretty weird and sinister, especially when mixed in with something normal sounding. Non-musical ambient soundtracks usually consist of sound effects that make sense. Dripping water, crickets, rats, industrial machinery, creaking ship noises, whatever. All these things can totally complete the immersive effect of a haunt scene. But they don't have to make sense. They can be used to confound and confuse as well. If you have lots of small speakers, and you can get computer speakers dirt cheap, you can set up a room to project whispering coming from all directions. All sorts of sound effects could be used this way, but the whispering is really effective because people will struggle to hear what these ghostly voices are saying. And the great thing is, they might not be actually saying anything. It could be nonsense words or backward speech, but the people will still be captivated by it. Some music and sound effects artists, Virgil for example, have entire discs of abstract sound effects that can be looped and run in the background for a variety of atmospheric effects, but there are a lot of audio illusions that have been around for a long time. One of the most awesome abstract sound effects is the shepherd tone, a chord that appears to continually rise or fall in pitch endlessly. It's actually a set of 3 overlapping audio sine waves that begin at evenly spaced intervals of the pitch range, and they repeat one at a time, but people tend to not notice the one that repeats because the other 2 are still progressing along the scale. It's basically the sound version of a barber pole, and the rising version can really amp up the tension in a scene, while the falling tone can give you a great sense of darkness and foreboding. You can find endless variations of Shepard tone on YouTube, or even make your own if you're good with sound mixing software. I used one in the Blackford Haunt with a few other sound effects mixed in for the vortex tunnel that we used as our time machine. If you thought vortex tunnels were hard on the equilibrium before, you should have gone through it with that soundtrack playing. Wow. Throughout the years on this show, I've stressed the many ways to unify all the elements, the sound, visuals, acting, in consistent, logical ways that work with the backstory and theme of your haunt. It really helps the audience to immerse themselves in the experience, but sometimes you just need to periodically throw that away and throw the people off balance. Freak them out, misdirect, confound, or just plain confuse the hell out of them. We design these little worlds so we get to decide what reality is, and if they lose their grip on it, even for a moment, in that moment, they are ours. Keep the ghost light burning. From the Theater of the Mind, I'm Revenant, and you're listening to Hauntcast.
I'm going now. Heaven help you.
Please like and follow the podcast. Stalk us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Links in the description. And help us by sharing Hauntcast with all your haunted Halloween brethren. Until next time, stay scary.